And welcome back to part 4 of the Gentoo handbook review and Gentoo installation tutorial. We are so close to finishing. This will be really good, and hopefully this has been beneficial for you guys. Let me just go ahead and minimize my screen here for that. We are on step 9E, File System Tools. And if we look at this, for the most part, we did everything with ext4, so we don't need to worry about XFS, we don't need to worry about RiserFS or JFS, but if you needed to, this tells you right here what you need to emerge so that you have tools and networking options that will work. Now, if you're using DHCP, we do need to go ahead and install that. So we do a time emerge-av dhcpd. And as I have said in the last videos, the time command just tells me how long it took to compile. The -av tells me ask and verbose, and I must have misspelled something. Let's see, DHCP-CD, there we go. If we type it proper, and yes, go ahead and install that. That should only take a few seconds, it's not too long. And we move on while that compiles, because we're going to go ahead and look. Now, if you're using PP point-to-point protocol over Ethernet and so forth, you're going to want to emerge those type of things. We're not doing that. And we are now on, I could have just left those last couple stages in the last video, but oh well. We're on number 10, configuring the bootloader. Now, you've got a couple options. You can use grub2, you can use the Linux loader, Lilo, or Lilo, depending on how you pronounce it, and you've got Grub Legacy. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. I am a Grub Legacy fan. I have used it for so long. It's so much better than the Linux loader, in my opinion. I just can't get used to Grub2. I just don't like the way it configures. To me, it's a little difficult. But we're going to go through and we're going to look at this. It says here, but before we install the bootloader, we inform you how to configure frame buffers. Now, frame buffers are important. That's going to set up your screen resolution when it first boots up. And it's going to talk a little bit about the frame buffer and also setting up your video configurations and your universal VISA frame buffer driver, etc. Now, here's another one of those places where I might get away from what the default is because they have recently gone to Grub2. I don't like Grub2. I also don't like Lilo or the Linux loader. I really prefer the Grub Legacy. And since I'm most familiar with that, I'm going to use that in this description. But please be aware that, as I said, they give you many options within the handbook. You can choose which one you want to look at and take care of. So if we want to install Grub Legacy, we want to go ahead and do a time emerge-av and grub. I don't think I need that sysboot. I never did that before. Maybe it's something new. Let's see what it does. I didn't really need that fully qualified name there. And we say yes, it's going to go ahead and install those. Let me double check to make sure. Okay, yep, we still have network connectivity, so I'm not going to sit there and stare at it and it's dead. So that installs Grub, pulling down the files we need. At least I hope it does. If you're ever wanting to know what it's doing, this tail-f/var log emerge fetch, you can actually see the log running and see that what it's downloading and where it's at. And also, there's another log in that same var log emerge or in there that you can also look at that shows you the stages that you're in installing packages, which is really helpful for when you're in the command line interface and there's a lot going on and you don't know what it's really doing. And to do that, say we're in this and we're in the console 1. If we go to console by hitting Alt F2, we're in this other one. Now the problem with this, using this as an example right now, is we're still using the live boot media because we really haven't booted into our new one. So I'll have to leave that for afterwards. So this installs grub for you, and then we're going to set that up here in just a moment. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video to finish the grub compile though. And that really didn't take too much time at all, 2 minutes roughly. And we need to edit the grub configuration. So we do a nano-w/boot grub conf. Now this is why I like the regular grub. I mean, it's to the point, super simple, makes sense. Default is 0, telling you that it's going to take the very first option you have down here. The timeout is 30 seconds, which means it's going to wait 30 seconds to choose. Since we don't have anything else loaded right now, no other kernels, we're going to just do a 5-second timeout just for the heck. We're going to leave the splash image to be default. So we're going to take off that so we can see the splash. And you'll see that this gives us a default. Now we're running 3.10, and I think it's 3.10.12. You can name it whatever you like, and make sure you take out these comments. Now root is HD 0,0, which is not true. HD 0,0, this means this is the first hard drive, the first partition. Now if you remember, our first partition was our swap partition. So we need to change that so that it's our second partition. And that's the same as saying dev/sda2. And in the kernel, it's going to boot the kernel, and we need to change this to match what's in our boot directory. Now this is why I've told you a lot of times I'll create simple shortcuts. If we get out of this real quick, we're going to save what we've done so far, and we do an ls/boot. You'll see there's our files. Now we can keep those files and type them all in, or if we go into boot, we can create some links. And I like to do this. If you do an ln-symbolic link for, say, kernel, and we call it VM-linux because that's what I'm used to calling it, we do the same thing, -s for the init, and I call it init-rd. Do an ls. Now we've got two simple shortcuts, and if we do an lsa, we'll see that init-rd is pointing to the init-ramfs and VM-linux is pointing to it. That makes it a lot easier when we're editing our boot menu. So we go back into the whole nano boot grub conf, and we do boot, and we can get rid of this long string and call it VM-linux. Now our real root is SDA2, so we'll change that, and we'll get rid of this and just have init-rd. Now I'm going to pause the video because I've got my kids coming home and I need to make sure they don't make loud noises. Okay, sorry for the disruption. Hopefully they'll be quiet now that they're home from school and I can complete this. Let's minimize this again here. As I said, this makes it a little cleaner to be able to use the VM-linux and the init-rd. We look over here, that's really all we have that they're doing. We don't have, or we're not going to do a rescue, and we don't have a Windows partition, so we don't have to worry about this part right here. We just keep on moving down, and we don't need to worry about that because we've pretty much set that all up. Default setting up grub using grub install. So now that we've gotten that set up, we'll go ahead and save it. I'm going to go ahead and delete this line here. We don't really need that. That should be everything. Save that. And then what we need to do is tell grub to configure itself for the master boot record. So 1 second while I kind of refamiliarize myself with that portion, because it's been a while. There are two methods. One is to do the grub install, which we'll try first and see how that works. So we type in grub-install --no -floppy, because we don't have that, /dev/SDA, and that's going to put it at the master boot record on SDA, and it cannot read table of mounted file systems. Well, that's probably because we don't have a boot device there. So let's just try grub -no floppy. See what that does for us. And we're going to do this manually. Root is HD 0,1 for us because it's on SDA2. It sees it properly. We do a setup, and we do parentheses, of course, around everything, HD0, because we want to set this up on the primary partition. It says it succeeded, and then we quit. And that's all we have to do. Super simple. Now comes the scary part. Did we do it all correctly? So to check that out, we're going to reboot the system and see if it goes in proper. To do that, we need to go ahead and type in exit, because we are ch-rooted still into this. This takes us back into our live CD. We want to CD out of everything. We want to make sure we unmount cleanly everything in Gentoo. The dev. Now this is an interesting thing. If you use these, it should go ahead and unmount these as well using this command with the brackets. So we will do that. And follow the instructions, because that's what we do to do things proper. Gentoo, and we do the brackets again, and we don't have to do boot because we didn't do boot, so I guess we just do /proc. Actually, if we're just doing /proc, we're just going to do proc. And now we reboot. But because I want to take off, well, let's go in here, devices, we want to remove this guy here. Well, wait, I'm going to make sure that they do that. Do a reboot. We don't want to boot back into our boot thing there, so we'll let that get there. Go into here, take that off, get that up. It should be booting into our system if we did it correctly. Let's try to make that a little bit bigger. And we will tell it to scale it. And it didn't exactly scale the way I thought it would. That's right. Let's get that back over here. Now, I always get some problems with the capture thing whenever I'm doing VirtualBox, so let's get rid of that. There we are. Now it looks a little different. Doesn't look as nice, does it? But we'll log in as root, and the password we set. Did I set the right password? Oh, bugger. Someone's yelling at me saying, "You goofy dingus." That's why you had to set your password again. Alrighty. So, that's an embarrassing thing. So we're just going to go ahead and shut down this VirtualBox, because that's not going to do us any good. And I'm going to pause it. What I'm going to do real quick is go in there and set the password proper, which means I'm going to have to chroot back into it, set the password, and then get back in again. We're going to pause actually real quick just to see if we don't have to do that. See if there's no password to it. I think there is, though. I think somehow it's not going to let us. Okay. Alright, yeah. My bad, my mistake. This is what you always learn when you're doing things after a long time and pausing. Alright, one moment. I was going to do all this stuff behind the scenes and decided that maybe it might be good just to go ahead and show you so that when or if you make a mistake and realize that, oh, something's not right, I need to get back into this system and do this, you'll know what to do. So what we pretty much did was booted back into the live CD again. Once I got into there, I did a mount/dev/sda2 to mount Gentoo, then the mount t proc none mount Gentoo proc, same thing with the sys. Pretty much following all of this right here for getting back into our environment. So once we've done sys, we do the mount --rbind/dev. And maybe I don't always have to do all of this to get into it, but I do it to make sure that the system is going to be proper. So once we get into that, and then what we do here is we do that chroot command, and do we chroot/mnt/gentoo/bin/bash, and the source. Of course, like I said, most likely a lot of this you don't have to do, but if you need to make sure that your system looks proper, it's always good to go through those 5 or 6 command lines. We're now into that, and we can do a password again and set a root password, and that should do it. A lot of work just to go ahead and fix that, but if for some reason something else isn't working, this is how you get back in there, and you're back to wherever you can start looking at the handbook and trying to figure out what you did wrong or what needs to be fixed. And then once again, when you're done, you go back down to section 10. We're at 8, 10, there we go. Get back down into the exiting out and rebooting the system. We exit. Now that we've set that password, I think that's all we need to do. While I'm in there, I want to look at that boot real quick. Boot grub.conf, and I want to compare it to mine. My network's down. Well, for now we don't care. nano-w/et. Nah, I'm always going to do that. Boot grub/grub.conf. And if we look at mine here, you notice I've got that VM Linux root dev sdb2. Now it's going to look a little different because we are using the built-in stuff. But let's make this look more like mine. So root equals SDA2. I don't have a real root. I'm kind of torn. Let's try it out with just the RAM 0. With real root being there, just to see what it does. Because we are using the gen kernel. But I am going to put root fs type equals ext4. I think I had to do that at one time. And splash equals verbose, because I know some people don't like to see all that stuff, but in Gentoo, if you're interested in what's going on behind the scenes, you want to be sure that that's available to be able to see. And I am going to set the VGA option to equal 0x31A, which is what I like for my resolution for the command line interface. And if everything's been set up proper within the Gen kernel, then that option should work without having to do much else. And that is really what it was talking about earlier in the grub with your frame buffer, etc. Whether or not you set that VGA equals or some other options. And that should be all we really need to do at this time. So let's save that. Exit out now. Go back into here. Do the CD. I hate that when you're in one window and you don't realize you bounce to the next. Get back to where we were. There we go. CD backslash. That's not right. CD forward slash. Here we go. It's one thing when you bounce back and forth OSs and things, you get that. Do the U mounts slash Gentoo slash. I'll pause it because this stuff is the same thing here, and I'll start it back up when we reboot. Okay, so we're rebooting right now, and we'll get rid of that there. See how this works. Looks a little bit better. My sound system devices always like to screw up when I'm doing simple screen recording and VirtualBox at the same time. So as you can see, it does look a little bit cleaner because I use that VGA 0x31A, and you know what, we're not, because we're using that boot thing. Bugger. So let's just close this, power off, go away, go back into here in our settings, make sure that our storage device, we have this disabled. Okay, now start it. That's not what I wanted. Start it now. Give me the errors, I know. Hopefully I didn't do anything wrong there. There we go. Everything's popping up proper. Booting correctly. That looks a lot better. And now we're booting into the proper system. As you see, it does look a little bloated because it's checking. It looks a lot like the old one did. We log in though with root. And we're good to go. Now you can create your user IDs that were set up at the beginning at this point, and they're going to be in there. In fact, it talks about it right here with option 11, finalizing your Gentoo installation. So I'm not going to worry about setting up a user ID for now because we're mostly going to be en route. And it does talk about how to do all this stuff. It also says now that we're in here, we can remove that stage 3 tarball, so we can do an RM stage. I thought we were at we're at roots. Go back to the root there. RM stage. Get rid of it. Now, in essence, we have a Gentoo system. It's in there. We're at command line interface. We're in the kernel. Everything should be working that we want to do, and we have to decide what we want to do from here. Now, the first thing you're probably going to want to do is make sure that your system is up to date. So we do an emerge, and we're going to do a time so that you can see how long this takes. Time emerge dash AVU capital N capital D world. Now I've discussed this before, but what this pretty much means is you're asking, you want verbose, update the files that are needed, look at new use flags, and go deep. so that it will look for the dependencies going in down the tree and not just the superficial ones. Now this is going to take a few seconds to try to figure out, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while it does that. And if you remember last time when I tried to install the PCI utils, there were a lot of conflicts and issues, and I said, well, let's not try to look at this right now because we're not actually in the system, we're just CH rooted into it. Now this is a good example of why we did that, because now if we look at this, there are actually 231 packages that need updated. There are 19 upgrades, 198 new, 2 in new slots, 12 reinstalls. It's going to be about 679 megs to download it all. And if we look at everything, we do shift page up to glance at it all, and our buffer is even too small to be able to do it. Now because we set it up with desktop as our profile, it's going to go ahead and install the X11 stuff that you need for your GUI. Before we do that though, I want to go ahead and edit our make.conf nano-w /etc portage make.conf, because I want to add in those extra lines that I had inside of mine. So if we go into here, we switch over to this page, exit out of there, nano-w /etc make.conf, and it's in portage now. We want to add at least these two right here, the input devices. Well, input devices probably good enough. So we put our caps on, input underscore devices equals, and we want to make sure that it has keyboard, the EV dev. I've got a Synaptics mouse, so Synaptics. And if you plug in a USB, you want the USB mouse as well. Since we're using VirtualBox, we don't exactly need to make sure that it does Nouveau drivers, but you would change those drivers to what you use for your system. And we haven't installed Layman yet, so we're not going to worry about that. But we're going to put that in there, and that might add a few extra files that it needs to install for the X11, since it's going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and run that again, and then once we get it going, I will pause the video, and then we'll see how long it actually took to get it updated to the newest files, because this is going to take a couple hours. So we're going to say yes and let it go and cross our fingers that it stays connected to the network long enough to download everything. Now back to what I initially had talked about with that tail. If we do an Alt F2, we can go to another console and log in. And if we do that tail-f/var and verify real quick. Ooh, my network's down again. Bugger. Alright, not a worry. Don't fret. Give me a second. Get my network going again. Okay guys, it took me a little bit of time. I actually didn't run, my network was actually running, but what I ran into was that the ETH0, if we do, for instance, go into here and do an if config, my ETH0 network driver was not showing up, wasn't there, and I'm not sure if something changed in the kernel or if something is the way it is with the gen kernel setup. But my little fix where it talks about how right here with udev for the predictable naming interfaces, that it says unless at least one of these conditions is fulfilled, and we did do this. We did put etc udev rules.d 80-net-name.slot, and we have that thing symlinked to dev null. and yet it still, something wasn't right. So after I got rid of all that, rebooted, I ended back up with the ENP weird stuff. And it also said the kernel command line contains net.if names equals 0. So what I did here was I set that up so that boot grub.conf also has there the net.if names equals 0. And when I did that, it finally properly named that, and it appeared, and I was able then to get the network to start. So just to give you a quick heads up, if you run into that problem, you might need to add that to your boot. Now also, I called it 3.10.12, and that should be 17, because that's what we're doing, but that's okay if we do ls/boot. That should tell us that that's 17. And if we edit that, because I'm a stickler for things being proper, and it bugs me when little things aren't working right. So we're going to change that real quick to, say, 3.10.17. Now when we boot up, it'll be proper. And now we can do that emerge-avu capital N capital D world. Let it go through. It's going to take a little bit of time to search and find out what all it needs to do, because there's a whole bunch to do. So I'll pause for now. Plus we are at the 30-minute mark. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and stop this one and start the next video, and hopefully the next video will be the last. So it'll be 5 parts in all with this tutorial.